Welcome to episode 4 of the Brainstorm. I'm Sam Corris, joined by Nick Gruce, and today we've got a special guest, ARC's chief futurist, Brett Winton. Brett actually directs the internal brainstorm we have, so it's good to get him here and have his insights shared. Today we're talking AI, Amazon Robotics, and is this the breakup everyone's talking about? Goldman Sachs and Apple. We'll dive right into it. Brett, everyone wants to know, is this an AI bubble? Lots of money flowing to it.
The short answer is no, but there are, I'd say, signs that kind of get your spidey sense tingling about stuff that looks a little squishy. For example, Microsoft invests in OpenAI, but contingent upon putting that money in is they're counting on OpenAI spending money on Microsoft Azure. Google invests in Anthropic under some kind of similar terms where it's, hey, we're going to give you money, but you're going to give us back money to spend on our Google Cloud services. And so in all bubbles, you have this kind of like internal leverage that builds up. And that would be the concern is it's kind of like a money recycling game rather than an actual demand game. But on the other side, there's like a ton of people, enterprises, businesses, and consumers that are actually paying for AI services, and the size that we think AI software is going to command in terms of revenue is in excess of $10 trillion by 2030. And so there's plenty of kind of these games to play before it gets big enough to be a concern. That's my view. What do you all think?
Well, so I guess my question. Oh, Nick, you go ahead. You go for it.
Yeah, no, I mean, I think we've talked about this, and I don't have too strong of an opinion, but it does, given what we've talked about in the past, is it not reminiscent of, the 2000 bubble where, you had companies paying in kind of this circular nature for each other's services, and then once, one link in the chain went up, it all kind of comes crumbling down, or is this different?
I think you're going to get to that.
Yeah, I think when I look
Sam.
at this, when I look at this, what I think about is it all depends on the scale you're looking. It's like, is this the bubble? No. But is this like a tiny little one? Probably. And I think we see this a lot with capital flowing in to these industries. So we've seen it multiple times with electric vehicles. You get a huge amount of company creation. In China, there was rumors of over 500 companies spinning up when there's EV hype. Most of them, never actually produced a vehicle. Even fewer of them produced a vehicle profitably. Same thing we saw with space when there's a lot of money flowing into it. Huge number of companies created. Most of them get weeded out. But none of those were really massive bubbles. And so I think we're kind of just at this early stage of company creation here.
Yeah, and I 100% agree with you, Nick, that there's like the canonical example for me is like Yahoo was valued based on its revenue, which was based on display ads. And then people backed into, hey, that means eyeballs are worth this much because you can generate this much in display ads from eyeballs. So then companies that just had eyeballs but no revenue were raising money based on their eyeballs and spending it on Yahoo ads. So then raising the price for eyeballs, which then raised their own value that allowed them to generate more money. And so it kind of like circles around, and then it's musical chairs, and the game stops, and it turns out there are no chairs. There's like one chair for 30 people, and everybody falls down bankrupt. And so that's kind of like where things get at the end state. And then part of assessing markets is saying, well, are we there yet? And for us, it's there's literally going to be hundreds of billions of dollars spent on AI hardware per year over the course of the cycle. Our forecast is in excess of $1 trillion by 2030. So the fact that Microsoft is throwing $10 billion at OpenAI, while it's a big number relative to hundreds of billions of dollars, it's still a small number. And so to me, the actual real vector of concern here is if, because NVIDIA is investing in an AI startup, does that prevent that startup from going to AMD and saying, hey, we actually want to use your chips for our language models because that's more efficient? So is Microsoft and Google and NVIDIA, are they using kind of like their space on the cap table to block out the competition from their own competitors? I think that's like actually the more dangerous vector right now, given kind of how large the opportunity is ahead and the relative small scale of the dollars compared to that.
And very relevant given the news that came out on Friday with it was Mosaic who released a paper talking about NVIDIA and AMD chips using for training. Can you give that a quick breakdown?
Yeah, so NVIDIA is right now the poster child of call it AI picks and shovels plays, where you invest in NVIDIA because they have a monopoly on the GPUs everybody's using to train the large language models. But AMD is trying to produce competitive chips. They hadn't yet been released and tested by the public. And so the question was, can I take an AMD chip and can I use it to like actually replace an NVIDIA chip in AI training in Mosaic ML, which is a company that helps enterprises train custom large language models, demonstrated, hey, we can literally like run a language model on an NVIDIA chip, then on an AMD chip, then on an NVIDIA chip, all on the same software, basically for the same cost. And total cost and get the same performance. And so it makes the chips interchangeable, which then suggests AMD and NVIDIA are going to get into, it's like, hey, we'll give you 10% off to use our chips. It's not great for return on capital for those chip makers, but it's great for the AI software companies that now have dual source on a critical component.
Isn't there commoditization issues on both sides? Like you're talking about it from the hardware perspective, but to me, it's still unclear where the value accrues on the software side. If you hand everyone an AI tool and it just becomes ubiquitous across enterprises and consumers, where exactly does the value accrue? To me, just coming at it from the space that I've been looking at for the past 5 years, consumer, digital entertainment, it always feels like the largest platforms with scale and distribution end up winning. And is this just going to plug into those, as in the incumbents win? And it's really hard to reach that mass audience because on the software side with AI, it becomes a commodity. Or is there something that I'm not fully understanding when it comes to like the software scale side of this, AI revolution?
I mean, I think anytime you have something that makes your life easier and it makes your life much easier than you have to pay for it, you end up paying for it, right? Mm-hmm. And so, and then once you are using that thing that's making your life easier, it actually requires a higher level of performance to convince you to switch. And that's true. That's not just AI software, that's software, right? Like I think enterprise software, it's not like Box is doing something monumentally difficult from a technical perspective. It's cloud-based storage, but they have a real business that enterprises pay for because it's working for enterprises and they keep paying for it. And hey, the enterprise hires on more people, so they need more box space to buy. I think it'll be the same in AI software, where kind of AI software that attacks a specific vertical and provides a solution to people will get them through the purchasing process inside the enterprise, and the enterprise will be like, I'm paying for this. And when your AI software agent is something that's kind of chatty and maybe a little mercurial, like it might get pissed off at you, actually it's probably harder to switch because you learn all the idiosyncrasies of the particular AI chat agent you're using to get your thing done. And if you switch off, you have to figure out how to bribe it and assuage it to actually get what you want done with a different AI software agent. So I think there's reasons to believe that it actually could be a little stickier. But I think there are puts and takes. But generally, it's not like any software business has a great competitive moat. It's more like you get embedded, you deliver product that your enterprise customer wants, and your enterprise customer keeps paying because enterprises basically are inertia engines. They get processes in place and they get buried below whole stacks of this is how people know how to do things. And you can't undo this because 500 employees, you're used to doing it that way. And you try to do it and half of them quit because they're all pissed off. I just think that you don't underestimate the inertia in an enterprise purchasing process. And then once something gets embedded into an enterprise.
And I
so
think
are you arguing?
Anecdotally, we're already seeing that somewhat. At least I saw on Twitter, people saying, all right, we got it, ChatGPT, Bard, we're using it. But now there's just so many offerings that have emerged. The buying departments are essentially saying, okay, we got to see everything that's out there. We'll test it, and then we'll choose one. And so it's kind of like the first movers got in and embedded, and now it's a tougher terrain for everyone else.
I do think you're going to, bringing this full circle, are we in an AI bubble? No, but it's not going to be up and to the right. Like right now, there are employees inside organizations are like, I'm going to try this tool and I'm going to try this tool. And at some point, somebody who's like the person that holds the purse strings is going to be like, hold on, like, what are we doing here? Like, let's actually figure out what these things do and which ones we actually need to pay for. And so there is kind of so many bids into the market of products that are useful. I think there's going to be some bumpiness in terms of like, hey, it looked like this company was great. And then all of their users turn off and it turned out it wasn't a very useful thing. And that'll probably flow back into the chip side and the infrastructure side where it's like, hey, you know, it looks like these foundation models are magical money printing machines. And actually it's not so up and to the righty right now. And so you will see kind of like these volatile cycles, which will include a whole media cycle that's saying, this is hype, this was a flash in the pan, these people lost their minds, but it's not going to be true. Like, it's not going to be true at a fundamental level. This stuff is really productivity delivering, and enterprises are going to use a boatload of it and spend a lot of money on it over the course of the cycle. But right now, you're going to hit like a noisy element here. So it's probably sometime within the next year where it's exactly what you were talking about, Sam, where it's like people begin to like pull the reins a little, and then there's internal leverage and momentum built in the system such that a little tug on the reins causes a few like horse riders to topple over and get run over by the rest of the pack. So I think you'll see that.
So the media will call it a bubble, but the fundamental value will still accrue behind the scenes.
Yes. The media is already calling it a bubble. Everything is a bubble according to the
Right.
media.
Right.
All right, moving on. Next topic, we're talking Amazon and robots. And just to set the stage here, this is actually pretty interesting. If you're interested in Amazon robots, apparently end of June is when they like to publish numbers. Because almost exactly 12 months ago, they published a blog post that said they had 520,000 robots in their fleet. And then just last week, they published another blog post saying that they had 750,000 robots in their fleet. So rapid adoption happening at Amazon, 620 robots a day on average. At the end of last year, they published a blog saying that they were going to produce 1,000 robots a day. So probably makes sense. It was probably less than 620 and now at 1,000 or above. And this is all setting it up so that 2023 is going to be the year that Amazon hires more robots than people.
And what type of robots are we talking about here? This is not Optimus and what Tesla's building with, humanoid-like robots. It's different, right?
Yes, it is different, but it makes you think, right? If Optimus works, then 620 robots a day would be pale in comparison to how useful those would be. So these are, if you're familiar with Kiva, which is a company they bought back in 2012, those were just kind of rectangles on wheels that were moving things. And those were what we'll call dumb robots, in that they essentially just looked at the ground for a QR code, and that gave them a direction. And so they would go to the next QR code, get a direction, go someplace else. And these new robots that they're deploying are the first smart ones really at Amazon. So they include LiDAR, which allows them to see people, objects, what's in front of them, and navigate intelligently around people. And so I imagine that's the bulk of those. But in this recent blog post, they talk about all different types of robots. So I imagine the mass volume are these small rolling robots. But then they also have these bigger robots with, claws and stuff to move packages, and conveyor belt like robots to move things. And then it also sounds like they're dipping into collaborative robots. So those are robots that can work side by side with humans and not be caged off.
Are we going to have to change like the definition of robot at some point? Aren't these just glorified remote control cars kind of navigating around?
Yeah, I think we're already in this zone where robot doesn't make sense. Because, it's like, wow, Amazon has all of these robots. But the reality is Tesla has even more robots. And so I think the useful definition is to think of industrial robots as, robots in manufacturing like environments, and potentially other robots. Brett, I see your face here. You look
Well, I mean,
you're
I guess
doubting that.
why are you narrowing things here? To me, it seems like anything that's deployed that can operate autonomously that has a chip that you can like throw a neural net against should be maybe considered a robot. So I like the broader definition where it's like, hey, Tesla has all these robots out here. They're just not turned on yet, like in a complete way. And because that lens is, it's like, yeah, Amazon's robots are just moving around packages right now, but maybe they're going to be hurting their employees soon or something. You know, you can upgrade the capability so they can do other things potentially, right?
Yeah, yeah. No, I think that's a good point. It's just, yeah, once you go broad, then it becomes harder to, I feel like, comprehend, just because they will be everywhere.
I think you'll have to define like single purpose robots versus like the humanoid type of robot that Tesla's working on, where it will have multi-purpose in its scale. And I think, you know, the other, when you showed this chart, I mean, the scale of this is pretty incredible. I had to look at some numbers just to understand. And at 750,000 robots, it has a larger deployed base than the entire employee count at Accenture and FedEx. And, you know, that to me is just incredible in its scale when you talk about 750,000. Also, 1.5 million employees in total. That's, you know, it just, you know, puts Amazon in scale for me. I'm like, that is so many people working at this company. And that's just direct, right? Because you have all third-party Amazon sellers that are not being included in that. It's just, yeah.
And Nick, you didn't even mention Accenture. Accenture is the fourth largest employer based in the U.S. So it's not
Right.
just Accenture, like random company. It's like, no, Amazon's robot workforce is bigger than the fourth largest employer in the U.S.
Yeah, FedEx is the fifth. I forgot to mention that. It's just, yeah, it's incredible.
I guess it is striking that like if you look at the volume of robots that they're producing, they're mostly just these rolling around things. Like the arms they need seem to, even at full throughput, they don't need nearly as many arms as just things to shift things from place to place. It seems like such a simple operation that's required, but they just require it in such mass scale that they need all these robots to do it.
And it would be interesting to know. Right now, it sounds like it's just LiDAR. I imagine there could be optical on it because, you know, one of those things we talk about is, right, Tesla's collecting all of this real world data to create a neural net that lets you move through the world. And right, Tesla AI tweeted, they said, you know, this isn't just for cars, this is for robots too. I wonder how valuable the data set Amazon can collect through this fleet of new robots that are collecting that data.
Yeah, I mean, Amazon does still have a last mile problem, and their aerial solution seems to be kind of foundering. So if they can do it with, you know, even if they can do those trolley bot or the little sidewalk robots or something like that, it seems like they would, this data could be useful within that context.
And then maybe as we wrap up this topic, Brett, it seems like this is still a lively debate in the robotics community, which is, does it make sense to have a system that's designed optimally to accomplish the task? And the kind of canonical example for that, I would say, would be a dishwasher, right? It's an amazing robot, but it's not a human-looking robot that's washing dishes the way we are. It's a box and it does it very well. Or do you design for backwards compatibility where maybe you're not solving the problem optimally, but most of the world is designed by humans for humans? And so what do you think is the path forward with robots? In your broad definition.
I think, yeah, in my broad definition, well,
Yeah.
it's kind of like the Tesla approach where you can sell a product that does something backward compatible, and then it becomes, so because it's useful within normal road context, driving with normal drivers with someone behind the wheel, then it's like set up to be useful as a robot, even within that normal context, as opposed to, you know, I don't know, designing something that needs like fixed infrastructure or is special purpose. I think that's like or look at like the farm equipment side. It's like you don't sell a combine that only works if AI is attached. You sell a combine that works and then you can upgrade with AI. And so it becomes like works even more broadly. So I think that's the direction to go. The question is, like, a humanoid robot, how are you ever going to be able to sell that in if it can like barely operate in the real world at all within a utility? As you try to upgrade the features so it becomes generally useful. I don't know.
All right, Nick, you're back with us. Do you want to set up this breakup story here? What's happening? Who texted who? What's going down with Goldman and Apple?
Yeah, potential breakup on the horizon here between Apple and Goldman. So this is a partnership that dates back to 2019 when Apple and Goldman jointly launched the Apple credit card. This ends up being, as according to Apple and Tim Cook, the most successful credit card launch in the U.S. ever. It's estimated they have around 6 million credit card customers for the Apple Card. But if you start looking further into this story, over the years, not from the Apple side, more from the Goldman side, there have been hiccups along the way. Goldman has, talked about the losses associated with just not only their consumer arm, but just within the Apple unit itself. There's estimated to be 1.2 or $1 billion dollars of losses associated with the card. How you get to that number is one, you set aside a certain amount of money as loan loss provisions. This is, what's thought to be making up the majority of that $1.2 billion in losses that Goldman's estimating. But they're also, having to deal with the scale of this card. So it's almost, and this is the way that I'm reading into it, the Apple Card and the Apple Savings account have been so successful. Goldman actually, potentially didn't have the infrastructure on the back end to be able to support this. They were approached by a regulatory body because they had a ton of complaints with the card. And this had to do with chargebacks and not having customer service set up in place to deal with all of this. And so there's been some hiccups along the way. And now it looks like Goldman is looking to offload this unit. American Express potentially is stepping in here. We're not entirely sure. And, this is all still hearsay for the most part, but it's interesting given, Goldman has been trying to tackle the consumer side. And Brett, maybe you have more info here, but they've had Marcus. This is their digital banking solution. They're winding parts of that down. So they're getting out of the personal lending portion of that digital Marcus bank branch, and now you're seeing them trying to wind down and get rid of potentially the Apple Card. And so, you'd think hearing all of this, the savings account, I think it brought in $1 billion in savings in the first 4 days. Like, these are tremendous numbers from any standpoint. In Apple's scale, obviously you can attribute a lot of the success to, but then you have Goldman on the back end saying, whoa, we can't handle this, something's going wrong. And so I'm curious what you all think, because to me it's like, is this success or is this failure by success? Like, what is happening here?
I think it's successful for Apple in that, like, the problem is they have different priorities. Like, Apple doesn't care if anybody makes money on the finance business. They want to sell devices and make the devices more useful, which means like frictionless transactions and hey, like, let's kind of like take the money you're accruing on these bonuses that Goldman's paying out to our customers, and then we'll dump it into a savings account that's generating like a hugely high yield. So $1 billion into that is not necessarily good for Goldman's consumer arm because they have to pay out high interest rates on that. It's hot money. And so from Apple, great. From Goldman's perspective, it's kind of like, they didn't have processes in place to do retail banking, right? And so then they signed this partnership, and it scaled like from we get 95 cents for every dollar we spend perspective, great. But that's actually not great. And it's partly because they've never launched a consumer facing credit card like that before. And so to suddenly launch with the highest volume launch of all time means that whatever kind of like things weren't right with it got amplified really quickly. And so then, at the same time as they're backing out of their retail facing like financial services, you can imagine that the leadership is looking at this and being like, why are we pissing money away on this thing that actually we're not even strategically interested in anymore? And we're stuck in this toxic relationship with Apple, which is using us to make its devices more useful. at our income statement's expense. It just doesn't make sense. So it's not a huge surprise that they're like, okay, like pull the ejection seat button and we're going to bail out of this. And, the guy who was in charge of it is gone. And, it's just kind of like a catastrophe for them. And then from Apple's perspective, I imagine they're like, okay, thanks.
And so
they'll just shop this around.
American Express steps in, and then what? Apple, right? Obviously, they've got long-term kind of digital wallet transaction goals. And is American Express just set up better to handle this, or perks go down, and this is like classic too good to be true, and now they pull in on the reins?
Yeah, I mean, it probably gets harder to get approved with another part. I think part of Goldman's problem was likely Apple was like giving out credit cards like, party favors. And then, those credit card users were like, hey, this Apple Pay thing's really great. I can buy like washing machines and cars and everything. And then, the credit card bill came due and it's like, well, I'm not sure I want to pay that. Hey, maybe I'll call them in and say it was a fraudulent charge. So I think that like there's going to be a lot of like tightening of screws to try to like right size the economics of the business for the financial partner. From whoever steps in will naturally want to do that. And then from the user experience perspective, that means the marginal person who's trying to get an Apple Card will be like, oh, this used to be easy and now it's harder. And Apple has its own ambitions to like do this on the back end itself, and so it's probably like the Amex just covers the card partnership. Who knows what happens to the savings account? Maybe they farm that out to somebody else. But ultimately, it's like Apple wants kind of that digital wallet to be a seamless experience, and doesn't. Their history with back end partners is like we use you and then toss you to the side. Look at any supplier in the iPhone business that's kind of solely selling into Apple. Those guys get trashed. So I wouldn't, I'd be pretty wary stepping into this relationship.
Right. That's what I think ultimately ends up happening here is Apple just in-houses most of this tech, and the solutions on the back end end up being, you basically have Apple being the bank at some point, right? They have $150 billion in cash just sitting somewhere. They can easily support this, and $1 billion of losses to Apple on this is nothing, but to Goldman, it's a little bit more meaningful. So yeah, we'll see. This, I mean, I just find this so fascinating because you have such there's success obviously in the card itself and the savings account, and yet you can't seem to support it from the Goldman perspective. And so yeah, to your point, Brett, like I would be cautious stepping in as any other partner. And then how does that work? I wonder, I don't know if we'll have an answer today, but how does that work? Are they going to have to issue new cards if, Amex steps in here? Like, are we going to have a new launch, the Apple Card 2, right? Like a whole new presentation by Tim Cook. Like, this is 2 pounds heavier, 2 grams heavier. And we've made it slightly thinner. So yeah, I'm curious.
Yeah. I mean, I guess they will have to send out new physical cards to the people that got them, but I suspect a lot of people didn't get the actual physical card. I think
right. Yeah.
I think that the mechanics of it all and the operational, there will be some frictional drag on Apple here. Like they'd rather keep milking Goldman, but ultimately it's like, it's very easy to have the best consumer credit card launch of all time if you are effectively subsidizing the business to the tune of $1 billion. Like it's kind of like, so from the consumer perspective, it will be like, wow, Ubers are expensive now, or wow, the Apple Card's harder to get now. Because there's no longer kind of like money bags being like, yeah, I have a strategic interest here. And really, in some ways, it's surprising it's gone this far where Goldman still even did the savings account thing, having already announced that they're pulling out of the entire retail facing banking business. In that, this is the kind of thing you do if you have big strategic ambitions and you're hoping to be Apple's back-end partner across all of their banking operations, and Goldman's realized this is a license to lose money. I don't like this.
Right. And then, as we wrap up here, interesting to note, right? Obviously, grand ambitions here. They were subsidizing it. They were not subsidizing the Vision Pro. And I know everyone's wondering how Nick is feeling about his bet about them selling less than 1 million. And just today, there are more reports coming out saying suppliers have been, asked for 150 or 100,000 parts. It doesn't sound like they can make over 400,000 parts. So Nick, currently you're looking like you're sitting pretty for winning that bet.
Oh, I saw that report early this morning. Immediately texted James and said, I'm feeling pretty good, because it was, I think 400,000 was the estimate on the supply side. Now it's down to 150, like you just stated, and the bet's for over under 1 million units sold and delivered in 2024. So I'm looking forward to this dinner that will be paid for by James.
Nice. Well, Brett, thank you for joining us, and we hope everyone had a great 4th of July weekend.